Hi, this is Daniela, and welcome to Bestie Life, the podcast, where we help you stop burnout now. If you're tired of running on empty, juggling all the things, and wondering when your life is supposed to feel better, you're in the right place. This show is your go-to space for real talk and practical strategies to help you protect your energy, create balance, and actually enjoy the life you're working so hard for. You'll get a mix of solo episodes and honest conversations with guests. My goal is to help you feel less alone, more empowered, and way more in control of your time and energy and well-being. So let's get into it. Hi, this is Daniela with Bestie Life, the podcast. And today I'm so excited. We're going to have a conversation with Theresa Skaar. She's also known as Dr. T. She's an educator and facilitator dedicated to empowering individuals to meet life's challenges with more curiosity, ease, and joy. She has her PhD in social psychology, her certification in body medicine, and an extensive mindfulness-based stress reduction training. But she's also, we focus a lot on managing burnout, cultivating self-awareness, navigating grief mindfully, and supporting caregivers. And so we were so aligned. We had such a great pre-chat. So I'm so excited to dive into this conversation today. Thank you so much, Theresa, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Love the name of your podcast. Thrilled to be a part of it now. This is fantastic. Thanks for having me.
So can you share a little bit more about your background, your journey, and your story?
Sure. I I have had a very windy path, like probably many can relate. I was a later in life student. It kind of took my first, took a very windy path through education and got my undergrad degree when I was 41. So prior to that, I worked in corporate settings. So I have this really interesting background of, knowing what it's like to work in a cubicle or be an executive assistant, marketing, HR rep, so I've worn a lot of hats and then found my way back to school. And then grad school was a complete surprise. I'm a first generation college. So, getting my undergrad felt like enough. And then I had a really amazing advisor, mentor, and now friend who kept saying, "What about grad school?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know." And my husband was amazing. And he's like, "Well, would you want to get paid to do something that you already do for free?" Which is, a little, if you're watching, there's a glance at part of my bookshelf collection. And so he encouraged me to do that. So I have this mix of corporate, my own personal mental health and wellness journey, as well as now, the more formal education and going to grad school, Daniela, as a grown up. So I was 44 when I started. I was stressed, like banana, so I had dealt with stress and burnout within like my corporate careers. But then this was next level. I'm like the oldest one in my cohort. I'm doing something that I never, had even dreamed or thought about doing. And that stress had me coping, and I use air quotes, in very, kind of the knee-jerk habit, like, oh, I'm stressed, so this is what we do. So, I was eating lots of sugar, drinking went up. I started smoking cigarettes again, and I had quit for 6 years. Yeah, but I
think college does that to you.
Yes. And when you are stressed, and maybe people listening might even relate to this, it's like there's these just habit patterns that even if it's not effective or healthy, it's like, well, the body's like, this is what we do when we're stressed.
Yeah.
And so I had been talking to a colleague, and she was like, "Well, what about meditation?" And this was about a year into my grad program. And I was like, I will literally try anything. And so I did. And I took my first mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And then that led me down the path of this passion of sharing these techniques with people in ways that they can implement in their lives.
I love it. And I love how you highlight the fact that, number one, there's no one right way to do this. The path is long and winding, and your ability to pivot and try on different roles and not, feel like you have to be one thing or figure it all out right away. Thank you. Can we just yell that from the rooftops? Because I think so many times we get caught up in these narratives in our head of there's only one way to get there. Or this is what it looks like. This is how I have to do it. And once I commit to it, and sometimes you're deciding at 17, 18, 19, what that is, that's who you are for the rest of your life. And that's great if you can find that, but if not, it's okay to not. So thank you so much for sharing that that
Yes.
part of your story as well.
Yes, and I think that that's important because we see a lot of focus on purpose-driven life, find your North Star, and I think those are books that I have read and those are concepts that I've taken in. And if we can add that non-judgmental
Hmm.
piece, if it doesn't look a certain way or, you shift and change as your priorities or life experiences change.
Yeah. So now let's talk about the part that also I think so many of us fall into is when we're stressed, the default of what we do is what we know, even if also we know it doesn't help us and it doesn't serve us and it doesn't fix the problem or make us feel any better. We do what we know. And sometimes it
Yes.
comes from learned habits or what we've seen when we were kids, grown up
Mhm.
doing and things like that. Like you have a
Yeah.
bad day at work, you come home and you have a drink, or
Yes.
you're feeling like I need to quote treat myself, then that's going to be with something indulgent like a pint of ice cream or things like that,
Yes.
And so how do we, number one, recognize when some of these habits are ingrained and not necessarily helpful, as well as then how do we start to undo and unpack all of that?
Oh, that's fantastic. Yes, because first I would say, and this idea of non-judgmental. So like bringing non-judgmental awareness. So right, so you're reaching for something, you wake up the next day, you feel like crap, like, and you're like, what? I wish I wouldn't have done that. Usually the knee jerk would be to judge yourself and be like, I'm never going to do that again. And then of course you're stressed and then you reach for those things and it becomes this cycle and the worse you feel about what you did then the worse you're already leaning that teeter-totter. And so I would say first starting with non-judgmental awareness and saying like, oh, okay, so this is what I reached for. Interesting. This is
Mm-hmm.
how I feel. Okay. And then paying attention to that. You're not necessarily changing in that minute,
Mm-hmm.
because we tend to want to do these sweeping changes
Yeah.
and then feel, like we failed. And so starting with that, just becoming aware of what you're reaching for, how you feel, and seeing how you can work with non-judgment. Because one of the things I realized about over serving myself alcohol was, Danielle, I realized with that kind of pattern of watching, observing, I just wanted to rest. I wanted an
Mm-hmm.
excuse to lay on the couch and binge watch TV. So I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm making myself sick to give myself permission to rest." And so
Yeah.
there's interesting things that you can start seeing and then once you're like, "Oh, I just need to rest." One day a weekend or one day
Yeah.
a month, I don't know, whatever your schedule allows, then you can choose that. So then you're actually choosing from something that's either numbing or knee jerk to nurturing and nourishing. And so
Mm-hmm.
then you're starting to get to know yourself and go like, what do I need? And there's a meme or something that goes around where it's like, we're just complicated houseplants. We need water, we need
Yes.
sunlight, like we need a
Mm-hmm.
good soil. And so, what can you do to nourish yourself? But I wouldn't
Absolutely.
start right there without awareness.
Yeah. And I always add fresh air too to that same thing. I
Yes.
tell my students all the time,
Yes.
like, please leave your room for a couple hours and go outside, get some fresh air, sunlight, water, those types of things.
Yes.
This time of year, especially, people are making, New Year's resolutions, intentions, goals, starting these new habits. And like you said, they come in and they think they need to do these massive sweeping
Mhm.
overhauls and changes and everything like that. And then by like 3 weeks into the new year, I forget what they call that, quitting Friday or something like that, where it's like we fall off the wagon. We are like, I can't do this anymore. It was too hard. It wasn't sustainable. It's not for me. And so I love though how you highlight, it's not about those massive changes. How can we start to then make something that's going to stick? Because that's the whole point, right? Is we wanted to
Yes.
stick.
Yeah, to make those, it's overused, but it is a lifestyle change. And so I love that we're talking about this as the new year begins because this is a favorite topic of mine, like New Year's resolutions. And I think statistically by the second week in February, most are done.
Yep.
And so when you're looking at there's something about a new year. There's something so juicy about like I can change myself, and this is true. However, much like a boat or a plane, those small degree turns will get you to a different port or a different terminal, it can
Yeah.
change. So I would challenge people to pick one small thing and then see what can build on that, right? So the small thing might be, okay, I'm going to set my alarm and, my intention is to go for a walk every day. Maybe you set your alarm and maybe you walk to your front door, or maybe you put your tennis shoes on, and then just allow yourself to explore those small incremental changes to see what doors open up to. And to your point, interest.
Hmm.
We're being given a lot of messages about what we should be doing and
Yes.
what it should look like. Have the perfect morning routine, to have the perfect day, to have the energy, to have the good sleep. And all of those things are key. But when we try to do them all at once, and usually that's after some excess,
Hmm.
December, it's not one day of celebrating. It's,
Yeah.
multiple holiday parties, it's multiple social obligations. By January, you're like, okay, I'm ready to just clean
Hmm.
everything out. And I would say pick one, just pick one small thing to
Hmm.
focus on.
Yeah. And I loved how, even in your own story, you talked about, simply just resting, sitting on the couch, whether it's reading a book or binging your favorite
Mhm.
show, it can be that small and simple. You talked about a meditation practice. I think
Mhm.
those two examples, resting, meditating, things that on the outside don't always look as, quote, valuable or, quote, productive, they don't
Yes.
have that same outward measure for
Mhm.
other people to validate, that then we discredit it ourselves. Do you see that in your work also?
Oh, yes, 100%. Because, well, it is that turning inward, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, there is the saying, be still and know. And this concept, it does look like, I mean, we have phones. We can be distracted 24/7. We can be, consuming input of those like exercises that I'll put in a file and then I'll never reach to do. But when you pause, you're actually giving yourself a chance to get to know you.
Mm-hmm.
And those moments, and I wouldn't have known that I needed rest if I wouldn't have first kept doing the cycle of overserving myself alcohol, feeling crappy the next day, doing the whole like, why would I do this? Why am I? Yeah. And then it became like, oh, I just need to rest. So
Yeah.
I would say meditation and mindfulness. A lot of times people are like, oh, I don't want one more thing on my to-do list. It's like, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm already, maxed. And so I am passionate about tips and ways to incorporate it into your life as you're
Mm.
going along versus and a good long meditation sit. Oh, it's magical. And I,
Yeah.
I I get it. If you're just beginning to like, how do I do stillness? Okay, then maybe working small ways into your day.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were talking too, I was also thinking, of my own self when it gets to the holidays and what I was
Oh,
doing versus what I do now. For me, it wasn't so much what I needed to do to help myself, but it was, for the holidays, I was taking on this idea of I wanted to make it perfect and magical, especially when my kids were younger. I was
mm,
doing all the things, staying up till 1 a.m, making mini pancakes and waffles for this maple syrup fountain we were doing, or like, just I wanted it to be so special that I was
yes.
doing so much that it wasn't now about, okay, now I'm going to add this, but I stopped doing some of those things. I chose simplicity. So scaling back the things I was already doing, I didn't need to add more time or add another thing, but by choosing simplicity and scaling things back, that
Yes.
created the space now for these things I didn't think I had time for, but it also lightened my stress load and things like that. And so I think
Yes.
kind of reframing how we look at certain things, if you're struggling to be like, I don't know how to add this, what can you scale back on? Not necessarily get rid of, because you
Mm,
still want to enjoy things, have that cookie, enjoy that party, but what can you scale in a way that then gives you some ease and breathing room in the rest of your life?
yes. That so as you were talking, I was imagining that when you chose to scale back and simplify, you were probably so much more present. Like
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
actually be with the delight and joy of your family and friends because you could be present. You had space,
Right.
which, instead of like, I'm creating this and then I'm like crashed out in the corner,
Yeah.
you're actually being able to be present. Like
Yeah.
that's huge. And so yeah, simplifying where you can scale back. And, I mean, another topic that I can talk forever on, what we won't right now, but is the people pleasing and is what we
Mm-hmm.
think that we need to do. And, it's that habit. It's a habit
Oh,
pattern. So
yeah.
scaling back can often feel like, I can't say no to this. Like, and it
Mm-hmm.
can feel almost really scary to
Oh,
do that
yeah.
when you're
But
thinking of like a party or
let's
pancakes or
talk
something.
about it because absolutely, I can tell you the a little tinge of guilt in the mindset part had to be worked on to get over thinking, quote, I was letting people down, by scaling when they didn't have that expectation. They never knew what was coming next. So they didn't know what they were missing, So yeah, let's talk about the people pleasing and the guilt and the mindset
Yes.
part of it, because mindset is so crucial to all of these changes we talk about
Yes.
making in general. When people talk about making those New Year's intentions, resolutions, goals, they never talk about the way you think about it. They just talk about the action. And I think that's where some of, the
Yes.
lack of success might come from. Your thoughts?
Yes. No, I am like, my eyes are big right now because I'm like, yes, it is yes, we talk about that distinction of like action versus actually like the why, so
Mm-hmm.
why do you want to do this? And kind of piecing that apart. I say that I am an actively recovering people pleaser. So this is like an ongoing journey. Brene Brown, an author and TED Talk person. I just love her.
Yeah.
She's,
Fellow
but
social worker. Love
yeah,
her.
yes, yes, she's amazing. And so she talked about, and this has stuck with me, saying no and, just taking that pause to check in with yourself. Is this a yes? Is this a no? She said that I think it was something like 8 seconds of discomfort um, is so much better than 6 months of resentment, or even,
Ooh.
6 weeks or 6 days or whatever that is. And she got like a spinner ring, which I just got a fidget ring too, to use that kind of as an unconscious pause to say,
Mm-hmm.
or a conscious pause. No one else
Yep.
knows that you're doing it, but just something where you are checking in and saying like, is this a yes or is this a no? And
Mm-hmm.
the I need to think about it is such a
Mm-hmm.
gift of a phrase, right? Oh, let me
Yep.
think about it and I'll get back to you.
Yep. Let me
Not
check my calendar even. So it's not on you.
Yes. 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 There's a book called The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Do you know this book?
I've heard of Gretchen Rubin, but I do not know that book. So I'm going to put it on my list.
Okay, yes, and we can link to it because she has a great quiz, and that book was born out of her first book, which was like the Happiness Project, and
Yes.
so she spent
Mm-hmm.
a year doing things that are supposed to make you happier. Well, what she was getting after that book was released from her audience was like, well, how did you just do that? How did you just do that? And she's like, well, how did you not just do that? And
Mm-hmm.
so she started asking these really simple questions, but starting with New Year's resolutions, like how do you respond? And so the Four Tendencies is actually a book about how you respond to inner and outer expectations.
Okay.
And so she, kind of divvied it up into four quadrants. And for me, that has been so impactful because I found out that I'm an obliger. And so this is again, like, how do you respond to inner and outer expectations? Helper professions often fall into that
Mm-hmm.
obliger role. They're actually 52% of the population, so they're the highest. But in this camp, one of the things that I did not realize is that if someone asked me a question, that I could say, let me check my calendar, let me pause,
Mm-hmm.
or straight up no, because I really felt like it would be relationship ending, world ending. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I read this book, I was like, I'm gonna play with this. And so I started to do this. And the rest of the tendencies will ask questions and they don't expect a yes. They're just like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking a question. It's a yes or no.
Yep.
And so for me, that was liberating to say, oh, okay. And then I started practicing in small ways because you are pointing to the discomfort is
Mm-hmm.
huge.
Yep.
There were literally have been times where I'm like, I'm gonna say no to this, and I guess this means the friendship is over. What? Like how little faith I had in that, but it's just a twisted thing that I've been unraveling.
Right. And I think also, and part of, we're talking a lot about personal development and your own
Yes.
kind of introspection, insight, and journey, and you also get to a point where if the friendship did fall apart over that, in some ways, that's a gift. And I don't think we always see it that way, to be like, if that person doesn't stick with you over something like that, is that really who you want in your circle? And recognizing the gift of having people in your life that are dependable, that allow you the freedom to say yes and no and those types of things, but again, that's a way in the journey, but again, recognizing these shifts and transformations that they'll come.
Yes. Yes, and feeling into, is it a yes or is it a no? Same thing with the non-judgmental awareness. Am I with someone? Am I spending time? How do I feel after? Am I depleted? Is my cup full?
Mm-hmm.
And that could just be a clue of, either a shift. And it doesn't, I also found through the book Nonviolent Communication. Do you know this one?
No.
Marshall
Oh,
Rosenberg. Um,
okay.
so the four tendencies and nonviolent communication were really huge in my own trajectory, but that one
Mm-hmm.
was, that we can say no and not have to make someone else bad and wrong. Because sometimes
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, they're demanding, da da da. And it's like, no, I can just choose this. But there is a
Mm-hmm.
discomfort with that. And I think when we're talking about especially changes, whether it's internal, external, how can we be with that and choose ourselves in a way that feels like friendly to our own experience, like
Mm-hmm.
I want to get up and go for a walk early. That might mean I don't get to sit in bed with my dogs and cuddle. There's a
Yeah.
choice. I love doing both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or you alternate every other day, or
Yes.
you split the time you have available into two smaller pockets for
Yes.
each. There's always options, though. And I think that's like you said, the all or nothing kind of thinking eliminates those options versus giving ourselves the freedom to have more.
Yes, yes, I love that because that does get and especially around this time of year, right? Like it it,
Yeah.
it really is that like I've gone from here to all the way over here and I'm gonna be this, clean and like
Right.
whatever
Like you're
person.
never going to have anything bad for you again. But the fact that you wanted it and denied yourself something, like I'm not a diet professional in any way, shape, or form, but I've read that that actually then causes you to overeat it eventually when you do
Yes.
have some versus having a quarter piece of cake versus a whole piece, and
Yes.
allowing yourself that moderation is going to help you to stay more successful rather than the all or nothing mindset. If
Yes,
we're
and
talking
if
about
you're
food here, but in
yes,
general, I
and
think
if
most things.
absolutely. And, to food and to all things, when you pay attention, you start seeing like what you're like, oh, I can have like a handful of chips. I don't need the whole bag because I've been mindlessly eating that. There's
Right.
some great books on mindful eating that I could also talk about. But because
Yeah.
you're touching on all of these topics because it's what brings us as humans,
Yeah.
challenges, joys, all of these
Well, because I
things.
think it highlights the why. Why are you doing those things?
Hmm.
Like, are you starving and maybe you need something with protein? Or did you really want that taste of chocolate, which you can fulfill in a short amount of time if you're
Yes.
consciously, practicing that mindful eating where you're utilizing your senses and the practice of savoring. Dr. Santos, she talks about a lot about happiness, and she says, when you add savoring to being present and mindfulness, savoring not only pays attention to the senses but also the how you felt at that moment, and so it
Yes.
actually allows you to enjoy an experience more when you tap into how you're feeling in addition to noticing your senses.
Yes, yes, and noticing because joy can be a tough one to hold.
Mm-hmm.
I mean this is also like noticing like oh I'm feeling joyful and it is funny because when I was quitting smoking both times I read a book and he talked about this idea of just paying attention. Judson Brewer wrote The Craving Mind, but he talked about like, okay, if you're smoking, and so anyone, if you're looking at a New Year's resolution right now and you're trying to quit something, don't quit it right away and just keep noticing. Just keep
Mm-hmm.
noticing and going like, is this real? Like, pay attention to the flavor of that cigarette and
Yeah.
pay attention to the experience of a full pint of ice cream versus like where you feel like a quarter of the way through or whatever
Yeah.
it is. Not because you're looking at calories or trying to fit into someone else's mold, but really like what serves you, like what
Right.
supports you in your why.
Right. And I'm going to throw one more book for the book club as well. Joyful by Ingrid Fattel-Lee is also
Oh.
fantastic, where she talks about everyone's chasing happiness, but there is no one thing that makes you happy. It's actually small moments of joy throughout your day. And she talks about how it's not just experiences with people, but color, sounds, smells, in the different way you find joy in these different areas. And there's so much science behind it. So it's also a fantastic read.
Ooh, I hadn't heard of that one, so that is now on my list. Thank you. This is yeah, it's so exciting to talk about these and to distill them down. And my main lesson or thing of all of this is, can you approach these things with curiosity and compassion and maybe some humor, like
Mhm.
maybe just going
Yeah.
like, oh my god, look, I am like forearm deep into this bag of chips and I haven't tasted one, or and
Yeah.
like just not beat yourself up about it, but go like, yeah, a lot of things are hard and I'm trying.
Yeah. And the same with these practices too. Not all of them are for everybody,
Right.
but to be open minded enough to try one, to try another one, and not necessarily do a one and done and be like, oh, I did that. It didn't work right away. But to give yourself some time and space
Yeah.
to try different things and see what works for you. And along those same
Yes.
lines, I always love to talk about gratitude as an underutilized form of self care with so many powerful benefits. And I would love to kind of know, what are some of the things that you would say you're the most grateful for?
Oh, I am a gratitude girly. Like it's kind it is it's interesting because it's a very natural thing for me. But what I have been finding is when I take and when I've talked about like how do you weave in mindfulness into your day. So one way to do this, and this it builds on where I get gratitude, is picking a thing that you do every day, but just like one thing, again, like doing the
Mm-hmm.
dishes, folding laundry, something that you're doing and paying attention. So John Kabat-Zinn, his definition for mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you can do that, so okay, I'm doing the dishes, right? I don't like to do the dishes, but when I'm paying attention, I'm like, I have water in my home. Not a lot of people, not everyone
Yeah.
in the world has that. And then I'm like, and it's hot and cold, and I have bubbles. And then looking at the dishes, then I had the resources to put food on these plates, and the skill, or my husband has the skill to cook the food in a way that is delicious. And then all of a sudden gratitude is like blooming from paying
Mm-hmm.
attention. And I
Yeah.
think, just briefly what you had mentioned about the joyful book, what are you paying attention to? And I think then you'll find those glimmers of gratitude. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, for me, I am so grateful for where I get to live, the experiences I get to have, the fact that, I got to go to school as an adult and talk about these things that are so meaningful and have impacted me, and hope to ripple that out to others in ways that are meaningful and supportive. I don't have
Mm-hmm.
all the answers, but I love that when I can take things that I've been grappling with or trying to unwind and say like, okay, here's a path, or here's a book, and see how that can support people.
No, I love all of that. And we could probably keep talking for hours, but for someone listening, how could they find you, Theresa? How can they work with you?
Oh, thank you. So I am on, different social platforms. I do have free meditations on Insight Timer, and we can put
Ooh.
a link to that.
Yep.
And then I have a website, and that's my name. So it's Theresa, Theresa B, which is my middle name, middle initial, and then Skaar, Skaar.com. And on there,
Awesome.
you'll find workshops. You can sign up for my newsletter, and I do coaching and speaking and all of those great things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I loved our conversation and can't wait to connect again soon.
Yes, thank you, Daniela. This was so fun. I really do feel like we could have talked for hours. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you got something out of this episode that really made you feel seen, supported, or just a little bit more grounded. If you have any questions or thoughts, I'd love to hear from you. And if you're up for it, please leave me a 5-star review. That will help more people find the show and join this community. I'll leave you with 2 of my favorite quotes. Alone, we may be strong, but together we're stronger. And when we support each other, incredible things happen. So let's keep showing up for ourselves and each other, and maybe even have some fun while we're at it. I'll talk to you soon.